Have you ever done something kind for a stranger and walked away, never expecting to see them again? This story begins with a rain-soaked hill, a stalled food truck, and a mechanic who didn't ask for a thank you. What happened next would ripple through lives, hearts, and choices in ways no one could have predicted. It's a story about small towns, quiet strength, and how sometimes the simplest gesture can change everything. If you believe in the power of kindness, stay with us. And if you enjoy heartwarming, inspirational stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another journey like this one. Now let's begin. A mechanic helped a woman push her food truck uphill, not knowing she was the CEO of a global chain. The sky over Pine Ridge broke open just past 4 in the afternoon. Rain wasn't unusual in early autumn, but this wasn't just rain. It was a cold, needling downpour, the kind that soaked through denim and hope in equal measure. Ben Carter didn't mind it much. After all, he lived through worse: blizzards, engine fires, and a grief that no weather could match. Rain he could handle. He shifted the worn Ford F-150 into neutral and leaned back against the driver's seat, the windshield wipers thudding in a steady rhythm. From inside the cab, Pine Ridge looked like a watercolor, half finished, half forgotten. Most of the shops along Main Street had long since closed for the day. Only the neon sign outside O'Hara's diner blinked defiantly through the mist. Ben was about to pull away when he saw her. A pale yellow food truck was stalled halfway up Millhouse Hill, the steepest climb in town. Smoke, or was it steam, rose from under the hood. Behind it, a woman was pushing with both hands braced against the back door, her boots slipping on the wet pavement. Ben hesitated for less than a heartbeat. Then he threw the truck into gear. The truck groaned as he eased it up the hill and pulled over just ahead of the food truck. The rain hit harder now, drumming against metal. Ben grabbed his flannel jacket from the passenger seat and jogged down to the woman, boots splashing through shallow puddles. "You trying to climb this thing in second gear?" he asked, voice raised over the wind. The woman startled, blinking rain from her eyes. She looked not local. Her ponytail had loosened into a cascade of damp auburn hair. The sleeves of her hoodie were rolled up, revealing delicate wrists streaked with grease. "It just stopped. No warning," she said, breathless. Ben ducked around to the driver's side and popped the hood without a word. A blast of steam greeted him. "Radiator's spittin'," he said, "and your alternator might be shot." "Great," she muttered, half laughing. "This day just keeps getting better." Ben offered a half smile. "Let's get it out of the street before some teenager on a skateboard ends up in your fryer." The two of them leaned into the back of the truck. She was stronger than she looked, but still, she was soaked, shivering, and clearly hadn't planned for a mechanical failure on a back road hill in the middle of nowhere. Ben braced his shoulder, feet sliding on the incline, and gave a grunt as the truck inched forward. They made it just past the crest, into the gravel lot beside his garage. The moment the wheels stopped, the woman slumped against the bumper, laughing breathlessly. It was a laugh edged with something brittle. Relief, maybe, or exhaustion. Ben crouched beside her. "You all right?" She nodded, swiping her sleeve across her forehead. "I've been to 5 towns this week. This one decided to break me." "You picked the right place to stall out," he said, extending a hand. "Name's Ben Carter. I run Carter's Auto right there." She looked up and took his hand. Hers was cold, but her grip was sure. "Maddie," she replied. "Just Maddie." He noticed the pause, the slight catch before her name. People running from something usually had those hesitations. "Food truck yours?" "For better or worse," she said. "I call it the roaming spoon. I'm doing a kind of traveling kitchen project. Pop-ups in small towns." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Most folks take the interstate. Or, Yelp." She smiled at that. "Where's the fun and predictable?" Ben didn't ask where she was headed next. Truth be told, he didn't care. There was something in the way her shoulders slumped, like someone who'd been strong too long, and he didn't have it in him to let her sit alone in the rain. "You hungry?" he asked. "Ellie and I were just about to heat up dinner. You're welcome to join." Maddie hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." The Carter house sat just behind the garage. It wasn't much. White siding in need of repainting, porch light flickering. But it smelled like home, chili simmering on the stove. fresh cornbread cooling on the counter. Ellie, all 9 years of her, ran to the door in socked feet, eyes wide at the dripping stranger behind her father. "Is she staying for dinner?" the girl asked. Ben glanced at Maddie. "If that's okay." Ellie gave an enthusiastic nod and darted off to fetch another plate. Maddie warmed her hands by the stove, a soft look on her face as she watched Ellie chatter away. Something about her changed in that kitchen, like she'd taken off a mask without realizing it. Over dinner, the conversation flowed more easily. Ben told her about Ellie, about fixing cars and losing his wife 2 winters ago. Maddie offered little in return, only that she was between chapters. Still, when Ellie asked if she'd be in town tomorrow, Maddie said yes. Ben didn't know then that it would be the first of many dinners. He didn't know she was a woman who had once stood on stages, inked international deals, and had her face on magazine covers. He didn't know she had walked away from all of it. All he knew was this: she looked tired in a way he understood. And she had smiled, really smiled, for the first time when Ellie asked if she liked chocolate milk. The warmth of the Carter kitchen worked like medicine. Maddie sat at the oak table, her damp hoodie now draped over a chair near the radiator, replaced by a worn flannel shirt Ben had handed her. It hung loose on her shoulders, sleeves rolled twice over her slender wrists. The scent of simmering chili mingled with the soft sound of rain tapping the windows, like a lullaby only small-town houses knew how to hum. Ben moved through the kitchen with the practiced ease of a man who'd cooked one-handed while holding a crying baby. Now he stirred the pot while Ellie set the table with the seriousness of a hostess at a royal banquet. "Do you like cornbread?" Ellie asked, placing a fork beside Maddie's plate. "I love it," Maddie said, smiling at the girl's earnestness, "especially when it's made by someone as talented as you." Ellie beamed. "I helped stir the batter. Daddy says I'm the secret ingredient." "I believe him." Ben glanced over, chuckling. "She also insists that cinnamon belongs in everything." "It makes chili taste warmer," Ellie declared, taking her seat. Maddie laughed, the sound quieter this time, but real. Something about this kitchen, this family, was disarming. Maybe it was the way they moved in sync, a quiet choreography of love and loss and trying anyway. Dinner was simple: chili thick with beans and beef, slices of cornbread still steaming, and chocolate milk served in mismatched ceramic mugs. But to Maddie, it tasted like a feast. They ate with casual grace, no forced conversation, no need to impress. And it was in that space, between bites and glances, that Maddie began to soften. "So," Ben said, scooping chili into his bowl, "you always travel solo in a food truck, or is today just a special adventure?" Maddie stirred her spoon slowly. "I'm on a bit of a journey." Ben raised an eyebrow. "The soul-searching kind, or the trying to outrun something kind?" Her eyes flicked toward him. There was no accusation in his voice, only curiosity wrapped in kindness. "Maybe both," she said quietly. Ben didn't press. That alone was a kindness she hadn't realized she'd needed. Instead, Ellie took up the space. "What's your favorite thing to cook?" "That depends," Maddie said, grateful for the shift. "If I'm trying to impress someone, I make wild mushroom risotto. But if I'm homesick, it's grilled cheese and tomato soup." "Daddy says grilled cheese isn't real dinner." Ben looked mock offended. "Hey now, I said it shouldn't be dinner more than twice a week." "Even if it's got cinnamon?" Ellie asked with a grin. Maddie chuckled again. "I think I'm going to like it here." The words slipped out before she could stop them. They lingered in the air, almost too hopeful. She hadn't meant to stay, not really. This town was meant to be a stopover, a breath. But now, sitting here with these two, father and daughter, so open, so real, it felt like something different. Ben cleared his throat. "You've got a place to stay tonight?" "I was going to sleep in the truck," she said. "I have a cot in the back." "In this weather?" His brow furrowed. "Look, I've got a guest room. Nothing fancy, but dry. It's got clean sheets and a door that locks. You're welcome." Maddie hesitated. She'd been taught not to trust generosity that came too quickly, but there was no angle in Ben's offer, no hidden motive, just a tired man with soft eyes who didn't want her to sleep cold. "Thank you," she said finally. "That's kind of you." "It's what folks do around here," he said, rising to clear the dishes. "Besides, Ellie already decided you're staying." Maddie turned to the girl. "Is that true?" Ellie nodded solemn. You laugh like you forgot how, and then remembered again. I think that means you're good. Maddie blinked. She hadn't expected to be seen so clearly by a child. Later, Maddie stood at the window of the small guest room, staring out at the night. Rain still fell, though gentler now, as if even the weather had decided to rest. On the desk sat a candle and a folded towel. Someone had placed a book there too, an old paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, its spine cracked with love. The room wasn't special by any material measure, but it was warm. It was safe. She sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the day finally settling into her bones. What was she doing here? This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to stay detached, low profile. One town, one meal, one story, then move on. No attachments, no names, no traces. And yet, the smell of cinnamon still lingered in her hair. Her stomach was full, her heart a little less so. Outside the window, the garage lights shut off. A moment later, she saw Ben cross the lot, his silhouette etched against the mist. He paused before entering the house, glancing once toward the truck parked on the edge of the gravel. Then he disappeared inside. He hadn't asked about her past, hadn't questioned the why of her journey. He'd only helped her push a truck up a hill and offered her a plate at his table. And for now, that was enough. The morning after the storm broke blue and clear, Pine Ridge had a way of rinsing itself clean overnight. The rain polished the leaves, gave the air a newness that made the small town feel almost forgiving. And in the gravel lot next to Carter's auto, Maddie Lee stood in front of her food truck, sleeves rolled, eyes scanning the damage. She'd slept deeper than she had in weeks. The guest room had been quiet, no city hum, no late-night emails buzzing against her phone screen. Just the silence of a town that rose early, worked hard, and didn't ask questions it wasn't ready to hear answers to. Ben emerged from the garage, wiping grease from his hands. You're up early. So are you, she said, turning toward him with a soft smile. He nodded at the truck. Planning to get it back on the road? Planning to give it one more shot. Maddie crossed her arms. I was thinking, maybe while I'm stuck here waiting on parts, I could try a pop-up, just for a few days. Ben raised an eyebrow. Here? On this lot? It has good foot traffic. Your garage brings in a decent number of locals, and Ellie said there's no real lunch option within walking distance. Ben smirked. So Ellie's your market analyst now? She's got good instincts, he chuckled. You'll need an outlet. Your fridge sounds like it's running on borrowed time. Maddie walked to the back of the truck and opened the hatch. Inside, the compact kitchen gleamed despite the storm. She ran a hand over the metal countertop, like greeting an old friend. Let me help with wiring, Ben said after a pause. I can rig something temporary until we get parts in. Nothing fancy, but safe. Their eyes met, hers questioning, his steady. Just neighbors helping neighbors, he added. Maddie didn't speak right away. She wasn't used to accepting help without suspicion, but Ben wasn't like the people she knew in New York. He didn't ask for headshots or credentials. He offered his time and his tools, nothing more. All right, she said, let's do this. By mid-afternoon, the makeshift pop-up was taking shape. Ellie drew a chalkboard sign with a rainbow of colors. Hilltop Bites, today only. Underneath, she added tacos, tomato bisque, and treats. Ben shook his head, bemused. You always travel with soup? I travel with what heals, Maddie said. He couldn't argue with that. The first few hours were slow. 2 construction workers came by, drawn by the smell of sizzling tortillas. They ordered beef tacos, paid in crumpled bills, and left with skeptical expressions that slowly melted into surprised grins. Hey, one called over his shoulder. You gonna be here tomorrow? Maddie leaned against the window frame. We'll see how today goes. By 4 o'clock, word had gotten around. A retired couple stopped by for tomato bisque and grilled cheese. Real grilled cheese, Maddie emphasized, no cinnamon. An art teacher from the local elementary school took photos of her lunch for Instagram. A deputy sheriff asked if she'd ever consider catering the department's staff meetings. Ben watched it all from his workshop, arms crossed, face unreadable. There was something about watching Maddie work that stirred a dormant feeling he hadn't noticed in years. She wasn't just cooking, she was connecting. She asked about names, remembered faces, gave second helpings to a man who didn't have enough for a full lunch. Her smile wasn't rehearsed, her laugh wasn't curated. This was someone who once lived in high places and now found grace in simple ones. As the sun dipped behind the hills, Maddie leaned back in a folding chair, wiping her brow with a towel. "That was a day," she said. Ben offered her a bottle of water. "I'll admit it, I didn't think tacos would fly here." They didn't. They soared. They both laughed, the kind of easy laughter that came after shared labor. Ellie came skipping across the lot. "You made $62. Maddie blinked. "Really?" Ellie nodded, proud. "I counted it twice. That's more than Daddy made last Monday." Ben threw his daughter a look. "We don't disclose garage revenue, young lady." "But this was fun," Ellie insisted. "Can she stay tomorrow too?" Maddie looked to Ben, then back at Ellie. "If your dad doesn't mind." Ben paused, then gave a slow nod. "I don't mind." Something shifted then. A new comfort. A silent contract between them. Unspoken, but understood. That evening, Ben sat on the porch. Legs stretched out, a beer in hand. The twilight painted Pine Ridge in gold, softening the edges of worn rooftops and rusted mailboxes. Maddie stepped outside wearing a cardigan she'd borrowed from the coat rack by the door. "You always sit out here?" she asked. "Most nights," he said. "It's quiet. Makes the world feel smaller." She settled into the chair beside him. "I've spent the last 10 years trying to make the world feel big. And it was lonely," she said simply. Ben turned to look at her. "You don't seem like someone who's failed." She laughed softly. "Depends how you define failure. I built something people admire, but somewhere in the middle of board meetings and branding deals, I stopped recognizing myself. Now," she took a breath, "now I make tacos on a hill beside a man who thinks cinnamon has its place, and I feel closer to myself than I have in years." He looked away, suddenly bashful. "You ever think about staying longer than a few days?" Maddie didn't answer right away. The cicadas buzzed in the distance, and a breeze carried the scent of tomato soup and autumn leaves. "I think about it more than I should," she finally said. Ben didn't press. He just let the silence hang between them like a question neither was ready to answer. Not yet. But the seed had been planted. The second day was busier. By noon, the line at Hilltop Bites snaked past the edge of the gravel lot and onto the sidewalk. A handwritten sign taped to the food truck read, "Sold out of soup, back tomorrow," in Ellie's blocky handwriting, with a little frowning tomato drawn underneath. Maddie moved with the smooth rhythm of someone who belonged behind a stove. Her hands were quick but never rushed. She added fresh cilantro like an artist flicking the final stroke on a painting. Every plate she passed through the window came with a smile and a question. "How's your mom holding up? You teaching that new puppy any tricks? Still doing Friday night bingo?" People came for food, but they stayed for the conversation. They left with more than full stomachs. There was something about Maddie's presence that made folks feel seen. In a town like Pine Ridge, where most people kept their heads down and their lives simple, being noticed was a rare gift. From across the lot, Ben watched her work while pretending to tinker with an old radiator. But every few minutes, his eyes wandered back to the truck, drawn by the sound of her voice, the laughter that spilled from her service window like warm bread from an oven. Frank Delgado, the retired restaurant owner who'd become something of a fixture at Carter's Auto, nudged Ben's elbow with a grin. "Let me guess, you fixed the truck for free, huh?" Ben wiped his hands on a rag. "Didn't charge labor." "Didn't think so," Frank said, chuckling. "She's got that look." "What look?" "The kind that makes a man forget he's tired." He paused, then added, "You ought to be careful, Ben. A woman like that's been places. She might not be staying." Ben didn't respond, but Frank's words lingered like the smell of motor oil, faint but stubborn. That afternoon, a frail woman with thinning white hair approached the food truck with a cane in one hand and a coin purse in the other. Her eyes were cloudy but sharp enough to notice the menu. "You still got the soup, sweetheart?" Maddie leaned out the window. "I saved one bowl just in case you came back. Ellie told me tomato bisque is your favorite." The woman blinked. "She did? She said your name was Miss Pauline, and you used to be the librarian." "Edononum, that was a long time ago," Pauline said, voice wavering. Maddie handed her the bowl gently, with a thick slice of grilled cheese on the side. Some things deserve to be remembered. Pauline sat at the little bistro table Maddie had set up with Ben's help. When she finished, she wiped her mouth and quietly began to cry. Ben watched from the porch of the garage. He didn't need to hear the words to know what was happening. Some meals weren't about hunger. Later, when the crowd thinned and the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, Ben brought Maddie a glass of sweet tea and leaned against the truck. "You made Miss Pauline cry." Maddie looked up, startled. "Oh, God, I didn't mean—" "No," he said softly. "It was a good kind of cry. She hasn't come out much since her husband passed. Seeing her laugh with Ellie, that was new." Maddie exhaled, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "I just fed her soup." Ben shook his head. "You fed her something more than that." She didn't reply, but her eyes softened. That evening, Maddie sat with Ben and Ellie on the porch, wrapped in a light blanket Ben had pulled from the back of the couch. The air was cooler now, carrying the promise of fall. Crickets hummed, and the distant sound of someone playing guitar echoed from a nearby house. Ellie leaned against Maddie's shoulder, her eyes heavy. "She's out," Ben whispered. Maddie smiled down at the girl. "She's a good kid." "She's everything," Ben said. "Some days I think she saved me more than I saved her." "Ah," Maddie turned toward him. "You talk about her mom much?" Ben took a breath. "A little. Ellie was 5 when she passed. Lung cancer. And the hardest part wasn't the loss. It was waking up the next day and trying to make breakfast like the world hadn't ended." Maddie didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said everything. She knew grief. She'd worn it like a second skin, invisible but always present. Ben looked at her. "You ever been married?" Her expression faltered just a second. "I was. Briefly. The kind of marriage people envy on paper. Big house, bigger expectations. Eventually he fell in love. With himself, mostly. I walked away with my name, and not much else. That why you're out here?" "Part of it," she said. "Mostly I'm trying to remember why I ever loved food. I used to wake up thinking about flavor, about the joy of feeding someone, something that touched their memories. Then it all became branding and quarterly reports. Somewhere along the line I lost the fire." Ben studied her for a long moment. "Looks to me like it's coming back." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, unspoken but unmistakable. It wasn't romantic yet. Not exactly. But it was honest, and it was warm. Later, as Maddie prepared for bed, she stared at herself in the mirror. The face looking back wasn't the one in her corporate headshots. There was no gloss, no artifice, just tired eyes, flushed cheeks, and a faint smile she hadn't worn in years. She looked real. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. The next morning, the sunlight came late and slow, stretching like honey across the gravel lot. Maddie stood in the food truck with her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, watching a hawk circle above the pine trees. The quiet of the town had become almost sacred to her. No honking horns, no conference calls waiting in her inbox. Just the whisper of wind through yellowing leaves and the occasional clank of Ben's tools in the garage next door. The third day of Hilltop Bites had brought more customers, more conversations, and something harder to name. An ease she hadn't felt in years. Still, a weight tugged at her chest, subtle but steady. That weight had a name and a history. She reached for her phone and turned it over in her palm. 17 missed calls, all from unknown. She hadn't told Ben, hadn't told anyone, but she knew exactly who had been calling. She locked the screen again, slipped it into the drawer under the cash box, and forced a smile as Ellie ran across the lot waving a bundle of wildflowers. "For your truck," the little girl chirped, "and for the table." Maddie accepted them like a blessing. "Thank you, sweetheart. These are beautiful." Ben followed behind more slowly, wiping grease from his hands with a shop rag. "Morning. That truck starter finally gave up. I've got a new one on order. It'll be here by Friday." "That soon?" Maddie asked. He nodded. "Pine Ridge may be small, but we move quick when we like someone." She laughed, but the sound was thinner than usual. Ben caught it. He didn't say anything right away, just tilted his head slightly, reading her the way only someone who'd spent years living in quiet could. "You sleep all right?" he asked. She hesitated. "Mostly. Trouble back home?" A long silence stretched between them. Then Maddie turned away, stirring a pot of chili that didn't need stirring. "Some ghosts are louder than others," she said softly. Ben let the words rest. He knew better than to push. But something about the distance in her eyes lingered in his mind, long after she walked back into the truck. Later that afternoon, Ben worked alone under the hood of an old Dodge while Ellie played hopscotch on the oil-stained concrete. A breeze kicked up dust from the lot, and with it came the low hum of voices drifting from the food truck. Maddie was talking to someone. Ben didn't mean to listen, but something in her tone, tight, formal, guarded, caught his ear. "I told you not to call this number. No, I'm not coming back yet, because I need time. That's why." A pause. "No, I'm not giving up the company, but I'm not giving up myself either." Ben straightened, slowly closing the hood. The conversation ended abruptly. Moments later, Maddie stepped out of the truck, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, knuckles white. She looked different, flushed, agitated, more Madison Lee than Maddie the cook. Their eyes met across the lot. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. But something had cracked, even if neither of them could name it yet. That night over dinner, Maddie tried to reset the tone. She brought in a tray of baked ziti, set the table, and poured glasses of iced tea like nothing had happened. But the air between her and Ben was a little stiffer, a little more careful. Ellie, oblivious to the shift, chattered about school books and spelling bees. Maddie smiled, nodded, laughed in all the right places. But her mind was elsewhere. "Your last name's Lee, right?" Ellie asked suddenly. "Like the restaurant on TV?" Maddie froze, fork halfway to her mouth. Ben looked up, slow and measured. "What restaurant?" he asked gently. Ellie shrugged. "Lee's Table. It was on a cooking show once. The lady had the same name. She looked kind of like Maddie, but fancier." Maddie set her fork down. Her hands trembled just slightly. "I used to own it," she said at last. Ben's expression didn't change, but his silence pressed in around the room. "I didn't mean to lie," Maddie said. I needed a place where no one looked at me like a brand, where I could remember what it feels like to serve someone and actually see them, not as customers, but as people." Ellie looked between them, confused. "So you're famous?" Maddie let out a small, broken laugh. "I was, for the wrong reasons." Ben leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "So the food truck isn't just a pop-up?" "No," she admitted. "It's a break, maybe a reset. I didn't come here to start over. I came here to figure out if starting over was even possible." Ben's jaw tightened. "You should have told me." "I know," she said, "but I didn't want this, whatever this is between us, to be about who I used to be." Ben stood slowly. "It's not, but it might have been nice to know who I was helping." He left the table. Ellie watched him go, then looked at Maddie. "Are you leaving?" she asked, small and worried. Maddie reached across the table, covering Ellie's hand with her own. "Not yet." But for the first time since she'd arrived, she wasn't sure she'd be welcome tomorrow. That night, Maddie stood in the guest room, suitcase on the bed, hands hovering above folded clothes. Her phone buzzed again. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked out the window at the dim outline of the food truck below. She had come here to run away from her old life. Now she wasn't sure if she was running away or being pushed. The next morning, the air was still. No breeze, no bird song. Just the soft thrum of a town holding its breath, as if even Pine Ridge had caught wind of a truth that couldn't be unspoken. Maddie stood inside the food truck, apron tied but idle. The griddle hadn't been turned on. The coffee hadn't brewed. She just stood there, palms pressed to the counter, staring at her own reflection in the stainless steel backsplash. The person looking back at her wasn't Maddie the pop-up chef anymore. She was Madison Lee again, and that scared her more than anything. She stepped out of the truck just as Ben crossed the lot, toolbox in hand, his gait slower than usual. Their eyes met briefly, no smile, no nod, just an acknowledgement that something had shifted between them, and neither quite knew how to mend it. "I'm here to install the new starter," he said plainly. "Of course," she said, just as plainly. For a few minutes, only the sounds of tools clinking and bolts being adjusted filled the space between them. Maddie watched him work from the edge of the lot, the weight of silence pressing down on her chest like a rain cloud threatening to burst. "I wanted to tell you," she said finally. Ben didn't look up. "But you didn't." "I was afraid you'd see me differently." "I don't," he said. Then after a beat, "I see you more clearly." That stung more than if he'd raised his voice. She walked closer. Ben, I came here with no plan, no agenda. Just a food truck and a heart that was barely holding itself together. He tightened a bolt. So you came here to feel normal? Yes. To be around people who didn't know your name? Yes. But you let us care about you without knowing who you were. Maddie's throat tightened. That wasn't my intention. No, Ben said, standing upright. But it happened anyway. She searched his face for a trace of softness, some piece of the man who had stood beside her in the rain. But what she saw was distance, quiet, composed, but colder than any words he could have thrown. I should go, she whispered. You should do whatever feels honest, he replied, wiping his hands. That sentence was both a dismissal and a door left open, and Maddie didn't know which one to walk through. By noon, the food truck remained closed. The little chalkboard sign Ellie had drawn still leaned by the front wheel, colors faded under the morning dew. Maddie sat inside, elbows on the counter, staring at a worn photograph she'd pulled from the glove box. It was a publicity shot. Her standing in the original Lee's Table kitchen, arms folded, bright red lipstick, surrounded by a team of sous chefs. The girl in the photo looked invincible, but she hadn't been. That girl had cried in boardrooms, had signed divorce papers with trembling hands, had stared at spreadsheets and wondered if she'd sold too much of herself in pursuit of something shinier than peace. A knock on the truck's window made her jump. It was Frank Delgado. She opened the hatch. Hi, Frank. You planning to feed a hungry old man today? Maddie smiled weakly. Not sure I should. Word around town is you're famous, Frank said, folding his arms. Big city restaurant queen. They're saying we've got a celebrity in our midst. Maddie winced. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. Frank tilted his head. You know what folks here care about? She shook her head. How you treat the girl who bags groceries. How you talk to someone's grandmother when her hands shake. Whether or not your soup tastes like it remembers something. He paused. Not one person I've talked to gives a damn about where you've been. They care about where you are. Maddie blinked fast. I don't know if I can stay. That's your call, he said. But don't walk away just because the truth showed up. Good people can survive the truth. She looked down at her hands. Even if it hurts someone? Frank offered a gentle shrug. Only if you stay silent after. That night, Maddie knocked on Ben's front door. He opened it slowly, surprised. Ellie's at her friend's for a sleepover, he said. I'm not here for Ellie, Maddie replied. Ben stepped aside and she entered quietly, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. I came to say what I should have said from the beginning. Ben crossed his arms but didn't interrupt. I built Lee's Table because I loved food. I lost it because I let people turn it into a commodity. Somewhere in the middle of awards and interviews, I stopped tasting the meals I was serving. She stepped closer. And then I got tired. Tired of being Madison Lee. Tired of being on. Tired of having a calendar and no life. Ben's jaw tightened. So you ran? Yes, she said. But I wasn't running from the company. I was running to something. I just didn't know it until I met you. She took a deep breath. You're right. I should have told you. You gave me kindness and honesty. I should have given you the same. And if I've ruined that, I understand. Ben looked at her for a long time. You didn't ruin it, he said finally. But you cracked something I wasn't ready to fix. A beat of silence passed between them. Maddie nodded. Then I'll give you time. She turned to go. Maddie, Ben said. She looked back. You've made this town feel alive again. I don't know what that means for us, but I hope you don't give up on what you started. She smiled. I don't plan to. Then she left into the cool night, heart bruised but a little lighter. It didn't take long for the quiet to settle in. By the next morning, Hilltop Bites stood cold and closed. The cheerful chalkboard sign Ellie had proudly decorated was gone. Tucked away somewhere Maddie had decided not to return to. The food truck's silver exterior looked duller now, without the steam rising from its vents or Maddie's voice humming softly to classic rock. Ben noticed it immediately. Not just the silence, but the shift in air. The kind of stillness that followed when something you didn't know you needed suddenly disappeared. Ellie noticed too. Is she coming back? She asked that evening at dinner, her voice too casual for her age, as if afraid of the answer. Ben paused, his fork hovering over a piece of grilled chicken. I'm not sure. Ellie pushed her food around with the back of her fork. She made me promise to try her cinnamon brownie recipe. We didn't get to yet. Ben offered a faint smile. Maybe she'll send it. Ellie frowned. But it's not the same. No, it wasn't. That night, Ben stood alone on the porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the stars that didn't seem to twinkle as much as they had the week before. He kept telling himself this wasn't personal, that Maddie had been passing through from the start, that she had her world and he had his. But the lie didn't sit right, because it had become personal. Somewhere between the soup and the shared silences, between Ellie's laughter and that look Maddie gave him just before she walked away, Ben had let her in, and now she was gone. 3 days passed, no word, no return. Only the silence, the way it stretched into the garage, into the kitchen, into every conversation with Ellie that stopped just short of asking, "Why did you let her go?" On the 4th day, Ben found himself rummaging through the drawer of unpaid invoices beside the garage office. Among the paperwork, tucked inside a manila envelope she must have left behind, was a thin leather-bound notebook. It wasn't labeled, just a small loop of handwriting on the first page, recipes and memories. Ben thumbed through it. Inside were lists of ingredients, sketches of dish layouts, notes written in a looping feminine hand. In the margins of one page was a scribbled thought, not about impressing anymore, just about remembering. He closed the notebook gently, as if touching something sacred. That night, Ellie lit a candle at the dinner table. "What's that for?" Ben asked. "It's what Maddie did when she missed someone." Ben didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything at all. On Friday, Frank Delgado walked into the garage with a bag of groceries and a scowl. "Town feels dull without that truck," he said, placing the bag on Ben's workbench. "I'm not a magician, Frank. I can't conjure people out of thin air." "No, but you could have told her to stay." Ben slammed the hood of the car he was working on. "You think I didn't want her to?" Frank raised his hands. "I'm just saying, good things don't always stay unless you give them a reason." Yerma, Ben sighed, rubbed the back of his neck. "It wasn't about what I said. It was what I didn't." "Then maybe you need to say it now." Ben looked up, eyes weary. "And if she's already gone?" Frank picked up the leather notebook from the bench and handed it to him. "Then at least you'll know you tried." That evening, Ben sat on the porch steps with the notebook in his lap. He flipped to the last page. Tucked inside was a folded napkin with a short note scribbled in blue ink. "For the man who reminded me what real feels like." No name, no address, just that. Ben stared at the words until the porch light flickered on and Ellie appeared behind him, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "You still thinking about her?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, me too." She sat beside him, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I think she left because she was scared," Ellie said, voice quiet. "Not because she didn't care." Ben looked down at her. "How do you know that?" "Because she hugged me like a mom does," she said, "and she cried in the kitchen when she thought I couldn't see." Ben closed his eyes. Some things didn't need to be spoken. They just needed to be felt. The next morning, Ben opened the garage late. He couldn't focus. Couldn't hear the usual clink of tools over the echo in his chest. By lunch, he found himself standing beside the food truck, brushing a layer of dust off the window. The lock was still in place. He considered opening it, just stepping inside, smelling the faint ghost of tomato soup and lime wedges. But he didn't. Instead, he placed the notebook on the driver's seat, gently, and walked away. Later that night, after Ellie went to bed, Ben sat at the kitchen table, a plate of untouched food in front of him. The house felt too big, too quiet. He reached for the phone, almost dialed. But then, as if summoned by memory, he walked to the hall closet. He pulled down an old box from the top shelf, dusty and marked Claire's things. Inside were faded photographs, hospital bracelets, the dried petals of a pressed daisy Ellie had once given her mother. And beneath them, in a small velvet pouch, was an antique ring, worn silver, a tiny aquamarine in the center. Ben held it in his palm. He hadn't touched it in years. But tonight, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a promise waiting to be made again. The decision came quietly. No grand declarations, no thunderclap moment. Just a quiet Sunday morning, the smell of bacon on the stove, and Ellie sitting across the table with eyes too wide for her age. She left because she thought you didn't want her. Ben looked up from his coffee. It's not that simple, sweetheart. Maybe it is, she replied. You didn't stop her. Her words settled into the kitchen like dust, soft but impossible to ignore. By afternoon, Ben had packed a small bag. He didn't tell Ellie they were going to New York until they were already halfway down Route 26, the old pickup rumbling toward the interstate. You sure about this? He asked as she leaned her head against the window. Ellie nodded. We're not going to make her stay, right? No, he said. We're going to tell her she's still welcome. That seemed to satisfy her. Neither of them spoke much the rest of the way. New York City hit them like a slap of cold wind and noise. The taxi ride from the train station was a blur of honking horns, flashing billboards, and people who didn't glance up from their phones even when nearly clipped by traffic. Ellie's eyes were saucer-wide as she stared out the window. This place is loud, she whispered. Ben agreed. Every honk felt like an accusation. The headquarters of Lee's Table sat in a sleek glass tower in Midtown, its name embossed in silver across the building's awning. The lobby was all marble and echo, the kind of place that made a man like Ben feel like he should have worn something better than a flannel shirt and work boots. Still, he stepped forward. The receptionist looked up with the practiced indifference of someone who'd seen 1,000 faces that day. Can I help you? I'm looking for Madison Lee, Ben said. And you are? Ben Carter from Pine Ridge. Her fingers paused on the keyboard. Do you have an appointment? No. The woman blinked. Sir, I'm afraid. It's okay. The voice came from behind them. Ben turned, and there she was. Maddie stood at the edge of the corridor, her hair pulled into a soft bun, blazer tailored, heels silent on the polished floor. But it wasn't the Madison Lee from magazine covers who stood there now. It was someone softer. Someone who had once served soup on a windy hilltop to a retired librarian and wiped tears with flour-dusted fingers. Ellie lit up first. Maddie! Maddie dropped her clipboard and knelt just in time to catch the girl in her arms. She held her tightly, fiercely, like someone who hadn't realized how much she'd needed this moment until it was already happening. Ben watched, heart tight. When Maddie stood, her eyes met his. He stepped forward. Didn't mean to crash your empire. She smiled, wry, tired, surprised. You didn't. You left your notebook. I know. He held it out. Didn't read the last page until last night. She took it slowly, fingertips brushing his. I wasn't sure you'd want to. I didn't, he said, but I needed to. A silence stretched between them, not awkward, not forced, just full. Finally, she spoke. Do you want to come up? He shook his head. No, you've already brought enough of yourself down to meet us. Maddie's expression faltered, eyes glistening. Ben continued, voice lower now. You don't owe us anything, Maddie. Not your name, not your history. But you gave us warmth. You gave my daughter laughter. And for a while there, you gave me something I thought I'd buried with Claire. Maddie took a shaky breath. Ben, I'm not asking you to come back, he said. Just don't think you have to run anymore. Maddie blinked hard, trying to keep her composure. You came all this way just to say that? No, Ben admitted. Ellie wanted to give you something. Ellie stepped forward, pulling a folded piece of notebook paper from her backpack. It was a drawing, stick figures under a red awning, a food truck with smiling faces, and 3 people standing together with hearts above their heads. You forgot to take this, she said. Maddie knelt again, touched the paper as if it were glass. I missed you, Ellie added. Maddie looked up at Ben. I missed you both. They walked together to Central Park. No crowds, no company reps, just 3 people and the sound of leaves crunching beneath their feet. I've been thinking of stepping back, Maddie said as they reached a bench beneath an elm tree. Let someone else take over day to day, maybe go back to cooking. For real this time. Ben didn't say anything, but his shoulders relaxed. I want to build something slower, she continued, smaller, something that breathes. He looked at her then, eyes searching. And maybe I want to build it near Pine Ridge. A pause. Is that an offer? He asked. It's a confession. Ellie chimed in. Can we have cinnamon brownies at the new place? Maddie laughed through tears. Every Friday. Ben smiled. For the first time in weeks, the silence between them was easy, hopeful. 1 week later, Maddie was back in Pine Ridge, with no blazer, no entourage, and no plan more complex than a picnic basket. It was a golden Saturday, the kind of day that made people believe again in second chances. Sunlight slanted through the tall pines, dappling the grass with flickers of warmth. Cicadas buzzed lazily in the distance, and at the edge of the meadow just outside town, a checkered blanket lay waiting beneath an old maple tree. Ben stood beside it, watching her approach with Ellie skipping ahead, her braid bouncing behind her like punctuation marks to her joy. "You brought a whole basket," he called. Maddie grinned. "You didn't think I'd return empty-handed, did you?" She opened the wicker lid to reveal sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, mason jars of lemonade, a Tupperware container filled with cinnamon brownies, and, because she knew her audience, a thermos of creamy tomato bisque. Ellie clapped. "You remembered the soup." "I remember everything you told me," Maddie said, tousling the girl's hair. Ben helped her settle the blanket and sat down, legs stretched, arms resting loosely on his knees. Maddie sat beside him, the breeze lifting strands of her hair as she poured lemonade for all three of them. "You ever just sit and not talk?" she asked. Ben tilted his head. "Frequently. Small-town specialty." She smiled and looked out over the hills. "New York is noisy. Even in my apartment, there's always something humming. An elevator, a heater, the neighbor's TV. Here, it's like the air itself is calm. It grows on you," he said. "It already has." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Ellie leaned against Maddie's side, eyes closed, content just to be held. The sun painted golden lines on their faces, like a gentle benediction. After a while, Maddie spoke again. "I've given formal speeches to shareholders, delivered keynote addresses to culinary institutes. But today, I just want to tell two people something real." Ben glanced at her, the weight of her words drawing his full attention. "I left because I thought it would be easier to walk away than to face something I was starting to want," she said, voice steady but low. "But I missed the sound of the gravel under my boots. I missed Ellie's stories. I missed you asking if I put cinnamon in my chili. I even missed the rattle in the food truck's fridge." Ben chuckled softly. "Still haven't fixed that." She looked down, fingers nervously twisting the hem of the blanket. "I don't want to live behind a brand anymore. I want to live beside people, build something slower, more meaningful." Ben's voice was quiet. "You thinking about doing that here?" She nodded. "I've been scouting spaces for a small kitchen, maybe a sit-down counter, home-cooked meals, no press, no branding, just food and stories." He leaned back on his elbows. "What would you call it?" Maddie thought for a long moment. "True Table," she said finally. Ben let the name hang in the air like a melody. "I like it. I want it to feel like dinner at your house," she added, glancing at him. "Simple, honest, healing. You'll need help. I'm counting on it," she said, her voice softer now. "I'd like it to be a family thing." Ben blinked. "You mean, with me?" "And Ellie," she said. "If you're open to that." Ellie, who had been pretending not to listen, immediately popped up. "Can I take orders?" Maddie laughed. "You can run the whole front of house if you want." Ben's smile was slower to appear, but when it did, it settled deep. "We'll need to work out the menu." "I'm flexible," Maddie said, her eyes locked with his. "Except on the soup. That stays." They sat a while longer under the maple, watching a hawk glide lazy arcs across the sky. Then, almost shyly, Maddie turned toward Ben. "There's one more thing." He raised an eyebrow. She reached into the picnic basket and pulled out a small envelope. "It's a list of all the investors who offered to fund the restaurant, and a letter I wrote declining them." Ben took the envelope. "You're serious?" "I want to do this the right way. No strings, no outside pressure, just people who believe in the heart of it." He looked down at the envelope, then back at her. "What made you so sure?" Maddie smiled. "You, and a 9-year-old who said I laughed like I was just remembering how." Ben stared at her, emotion rising like a tide he didn't bother fighting. "I can't promise it'll be easy," he said. "I don't want easy," Maddie replied. "I want real." He reached over, took her hand. "Then you're in the right place." Ellie interrupted the moment with a declaration. We should do picnics every weekend. Only if you're in charge of brownies, Maddie said. Deal. As laughter echoed through the field, Maddie leaned her head lightly against Ben's shoulder. He didn't move. Just let her rest there, like it was the most natural thing in the world. No titles, no fear, just a promise sealed in sunlight and soup. The coming soon sign went up 2 weeks later. Hand-painted, slightly crooked, and utterly perfect. True table, real food, real stories. It hung above the front porch of a whitewashed cottage at the edge of Pine Ridges downtown, where a bakery had once stood decades ago. The windows had been scrubbed clear, the floorboards sanded and stained by Ben himself, and the old wooden countertop inside had been lovingly restored by hand. Maddie had wanted it that way. No chrome, no digital menus, just warmth, wood, and the scent of something slow-cooked and generous in the air. I wanted to feel like someone's kitchen, she told Ben as they stood inside on opening morning, aprons tied, the scent of cinnamon biscuits already drifting through the space. Ben surveyed the room. 6 tables, a long counter with mismatched stools, strings of Edison bulbs overhead, and fresh flowers in mason jars by the windows. Ellie had written the menu on a chalkboard that leaned slightly to the left. She had included a doodle of a smiling soup bowl. You sure you're ready? Ben asked. Maddie nodded. I've never been more ready for anything. The door opened promptly at 10. First came Frank Delgado, dressed in a button-down shirt he hadn't worn since retirement, followed by Miss Pauline, whose cane tapped a steady rhythm on the new floors. A pair of high school teachers. Then the mayor himself. A trickle of customers turned into a quiet stream. And just like that, True Table was alive. By noon, every table was full. Maddie worked the stove in the back. Calm, steady, radiant in the way someone becomes when they've finally found where they belong. She wore no makeup, no name tag, and no armor. Just flour on her apron and purpose in her smile. Ben moved between the tables, serving plates with a quiet pride. Ellie manned the register, occasionally offering unsolicited but endearing menu suggestions. Try the soup, she'd whisper. It's magic. At one table, Miss Pauline dipped her spoon and let out a sigh. It's like the past and the future are hugging. Maddie overheard and her eyes welled. Around 3 o'clock, a tall man in a suit walked in. Polished, expensive, out of place. Ben spotted him immediately and stiffened. The man approached the counter with a slow, assessing gaze. I'm looking for Madison Lee. Maddie stepped forward, wiping her hands. You found her? He glanced around. Didn't expect to see you in flannel and flour. You're not the first, she replied. I represent a consortium that would like to extend another investment offer. International expansion, multi-location branding. We believe your return to form could be... I'm not returning, she interrupted gently. I'm beginning. He blinked. You're walking away from global opportunity. For this? Maddie smiled. This is the opportunity. The man tried again. You built a culinary empire. You don't have to prove anything here. I'm not proving anything, she said. I'm healing. Ben, standing nearby, had said nothing. But as the man walked out, clearly perplexed, he murmured, You handled that better than I would have. I've practiced, Maddie said. But it still feels good. He looked at her with admiration, and something more. You're really not going back? I already am, she said softly. Back to where I was always meant to be. That night, after the last dish had been washed and the final light dimmed, the 3 of them sat on the front steps of True Table eating leftover brownies straight from the pan. I think we did okay, Maddie said, her head resting against Ben's shoulder. You fed half the town and made Miss Pauline cry again, Ben said. I'd call that a success. Ellie yawned and leaned against Maddie's other side. Do you think we'll be open forever? Maddie wrapped an arm around her. As long as people want soup, stories, and cinnamon. A warm breeze rustled through the trees as the stars blinked into view, one by one. Ben reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded napkin. Ellie's drawing from New York, still tucked safely away. She drew this before you came back, he said. Guess she knew. Maddie took it carefully, smoothing the creases. Guess she did. Ben hesitated, then added, You ever think about what forever might look like? For us? Maddie turned to him. the porch light catching the softness in her expression. All the time. They didn't kiss. Not yet. But the promise between them was louder than any vow. Inside, the kitchen still held the scent of baked bread and warmth. Outside, the night hummed with crickets in quiet belonging. And on the windowsill next to the closed sign stood a single jar of wildflowers, bright, ordinary, and utterly beautiful. Fall came quietly to Pine Ridge. The leaves turned without announcement, trading green for copper and gold. The days shortened, the breeze sharpened, and the scent of cinnamon and wood smoke lingered longer in the air. At True Table, the chalkboard menu now featured squash bisque and pumpkin cornbread. A little hand-drawn pumpkin Ellie had taped to the register gave the place an almost festive feeling, like the beginning of a season that mattered. Business was steady, but what truly grew was the rhythm of comfort, of familiarity, of something like family. Maddie and Ben moved around each other in perfect sync, her hand reaching for a plate just as his set it down, his glance catching hers across the counter in a quiet, private language of shared effort and growing affection. And still, he hadn't said the words. Not yet, not out loud. The ring had been in the bottom of the old toolbox for years. Ben found it one Sunday morning, rummaging for a wrench he hadn't needed in ages. The silver band was tarnished, but the aquamarine stone still caught light in a way that stopped him mid-motion. It wasn't Claire's wedding ring. That had been buried with her. This was a family heirloom, passed down from his mother. Claire had worn it briefly as a promise before their official engagement, and after she passed, Ben had tucked it away, unsure if it still belonged to anyone. Until now. He turned it over in his palm, thumb brushing the delicate pattern around the band. It wasn't grand, it wasn't modern, but it was quiet and beautiful, like the kind of love he'd come to understand too late, and maybe had found again just in time. That evening, Maddie was in the kitchen at True Table, sleeves rolled up, flour dusting her cheekbone. She was perfect in that moment, not because she was flawless, but because she was herself, present, rooted, alive. Ben watched her from the doorway. "You've got that look again," she teased without turning. "What look?" "Like you're about to say something and then change your mind." He stepped into the kitchen and leaned against the doorway. "You busy tomorrow afternoon?" She looked up. "What's tomorrow?" "Something I've been meaning to do." Maddie wiped her hands on a towel. "Is this one of those mysterious small-town traditions?" "Something like that," he said, smiling. "Wear boots." It rained lightly the next day, just enough to freshen the air, but not enough to muddy the path. Ben drove them out to the old hill behind Carter's auto, where the view stretched far over the valley and the pines waved like quiet sentinels. He had brought a thermos of coffee, 2 mugs, and a blanket. They stood in silence for a long moment, the wind lifting Maddie's hair, the scent of wet leaves and earth surrounding them. "You brought me here for the view?" she asked, eyebrows raised. "No," Ben said. "I brought you here because this is where I came the night before Claire's funeral." Maddie's expression sobered, but she didn't speak. She waited. "I stood right there," he said, pointing toward a large flat rock, "and I asked God if I'd ever feel whole again. I didn't hear anything back. But that same night, Ellie woke up and asked for pancakes, so I made them." Maddie smiled softly. "Pancakes is prophecy." "Something like that," he said. "I've come back here a few times since. Not to talk, just to remember." "And now?" Ben reached into his coat pocket and held out the ring. Open palm, no grand flourish. Just a man with dirt under his nails, offering something quiet and real. Maddie stared at it, her hand covering her mouth. "It's not new," he said. "It's older than both of us. But it's been worn by strong women. And I figured, maybe it's time someone wore it again." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Ben," he held her gaze. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight, or even this year, but I wanted you to know I'm not afraid anymore, of starting over, of letting someone in, of letting go." She looked down at the ring, then back at him, eyes glistening. "You think it'll fit?" "We can resize it," he said, "but it already feels like it's yours." Maddie didn't say yes. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face into his chest. Ben held her like someone anchoring himself to the very moment, The wind, the earth, the fragile, astonishing heartbeat of a second chance. Above them, the rain stopped. The clouds broke open just enough to let sunlight filter through. Soft, golden, forgiving. And somewhere far below, the sign outside True Table caught the light and gleamed. 1 year later, the food truck sat in the exact same spot where it had stalled that first rainy afternoon, just past the crest of Millhouse Hill, beside Carter's auto. Only now, it was no longer a broken-down relic. It had been scrubbed clean, polished to a soft gleam, its yellow paint fresh and cheerful. The name Hilltop Bites repainted in bold white script across the side, and beneath it, in smaller cursive, someone had added, "Where kindness meets real life." It wasn't in service anymore. It was parked like a monument, just a few feet from True Table, serving no purpose except to remind people where it all began. That morning, the sun rose slowly over Pine Ridge, casting long golden rays through the trees. Inside True Table, Maddie stood by the stove, flipping pancakes while Ellie prepared whipped cream in an oversized mixing bowl. "She said lightly whipped, Ellie," Ben called from the dining room. "Not catapulted." "I like it fluffy," Ellie defended, licking the spoon. Maddie smiled, hair tied back, wearing a new apron that said co-founder in stitched lettering. Ellie's idea, of course. Outside, a small crowd had begun to gather. Today was the restaurant's 1-year anniversary, and they were serving breakfast to anyone who walked in. No prices, just a tip jar and an open door. Ben poured coffee for Miss Pauline and helped Frank adjust his chair near the window. A high school senior Maddie had once helped write a scholarship essay for was back from college, waiting in line for the soup she missed more than campus pizza. A young couple who'd had their first date at True Table sat holding hands at the corner table, smiling at each other like they'd won something rare. It wasn't just a restaurant anymore. It was a landmark, a story, a home. Around noon, after the last stack of pancakes had been flipped, Maddie stepped outside and stood beside the old food truck, hands in her pockets. She looked up at it the way one might look at an old friend, grateful, amused, a little teary. Ben came up behind her, placing a gentle hand on her back. "You miss it?" "Every now and then," she said. "It saved me." He nodded. "It brought you here." She leaned against the truck. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that day." Ben looked at her. "I didn't stop for the truck." She turned to him. "No?" He shook his head. "I stopped because there was someone standing in the rain who looked like she was trying very hard not to fall apart. And I remembered what that felt like." She took his hand. They stood there for a long moment, the breeze lifting her hair, the air filled with quiet celebration. "I still haven't said yes," Maddie said softly. Ben smiled. "I'm not keeping score." She pulled the ring from her necklace, slipped it onto her finger with calm certainty. "Yes," she said. Ben blinked. "That was subtle." Maddie grinned. "So was your proposal." He pulled her into a hug, burying his face into her hair. "You're everything I didn't know I was still allowed to hope for." "And you," she whispered, "are everything I thought I'd lost forever." That evening, as the crowd dispersed and the chairs were stacked, Ben lit a candle on the windowsill and dimmed the lights. Ellie placed the last bouquet of wildflowers in the center of the main table. Maddie sat beside her little family, tired but radiant. Frank raised a glass of sweet tea and a quiet toast. "To second chances," he said. "And to cinnamon and everything," Ellie added, earning a laugh from every corner. "To kindness," Maddie said, raising her glass. Ben raised his too. "And to the hill where it all began." Later that night, when the doors were locked and the sign flipped to closed, the three of them stepped out into the cool night air. Above, the stars shone like promises, and beside them, the old food truck caught the light from the porch. Silent, still, proud. Ben wrapped his arm around Maddie's waist. Ellie nestled between them. They didn't need to say anything more. The past had brought them pain, but also purpose. The present had brought them together. And the future? It would be built from cinnamon, steel, soil, and second chances. Now I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? And what part of this story touched your heart the most? Let's talk in the comments. Your thoughts truly make this space feel like home. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more tales of love, kindness, and second chances, Be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We've got many more coming your way. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the quiet power of goodness.